The crowd at the county livestock auction barely stirred as the next horse was led into the ring. He looked like nothing special, skinny, crusted in dirt, with a noticeable limp in his rear right leg and ribs pressing hard against a dull, molted coat. A few folks chuckled, others rolled their eyes. Even the auctioneer hesitated a moment too long before lifting the mic. Next up, number 61, gelding, 6 years, no documentation. Starting bid $1. A ripple of amused snorts rolled through the stands. No one moved. Near the back of the pen, an elderly man leaned on a weather-worn post. His hat had seen too many summers, his coat hung uneven from a missing button, and his boots were crusted, in the color of old dust. His name was Elijah Creel. Most didn't know him. The few who did swapped quiet tales about the ranch he lost, the son who vanished, and how silence had become his preferred company. Elijah studied the horse through narrowed eyes. The animal tugged gently at the lead rope, its body weary, not wild. The eyes held no fire, just fatigue bruised but not broken. And beneath the dirt and tremble, Elijah saw something he hadn't glimpsed in years. He raised one hand. $1, he said. The auctioneer blinked. $1 do I hear? 2, silence, once, twice. The gavel dropped with a wooden finality that felt heavier than the price. Sold to the man in the back. A few chuckles followed Elijah as he stepped toward the gate. He ought to be paid to take it, someone muttered. Another added, that horse has got more glue than go. Elijah gave no reply. He just nodded at the wrangler, who handed him the rope. The horse stood still, like it had stopped resisting anything long ago. Together they walked toward Elijah's rusted trailer parked beyond the crowd. The horse's hooves tapped gently on the gravel, the limp more visible now. Elijah didn't rush, his pace slow, steady in time with the horse's faltering gait. When they reached the trailer, Elijah finally spoke. Named Samson, he said softly, patting the animal's shoulder. Don't know yours yet, but we'll figure that out. He opened the trailer gate and waited. After a long pause, the horse stepped in. The drive to Elijah's place took an hour. The land rolled past, dry gold and faded brown, dotted with fence posts, tilting like tired men and barns stripped by wind. Elijah's ranch, once vibrant, had shrunk to a patch he could manage alone. Most outbuildings were shuttered. One stable remained upright, barely leaning like a man with an old injury. Elijah parked nearby, lowered the ramp, and gave a quiet whistle. The horse backed out slow, head low. He led it to a stall, spread fresh straw, and set a clean bucket of water nearby. No rush, he said under his breath. You've got time now. That night, Elijah sat on the porch, sipping weak coffee, watching stars blink into the open plains. From the stall came faint shuffles, the occasional sigh like the horse was too spent for dreams. Elijah hadn't come to buy. He visited auctions. Out of habit more than hope, just to see what the world was throwing away. But when he'd seen that horse, something stirred. It reminded him of another Cypress, a wild Mustang he'd once tamed. That horse had fought every step until the two moved as one, speaking in weight and silence, not sound. They'd ridden across plains with no destination, only rhythm. But Cypress died 5 years back, not long after Elijah's son vanished without goodbye. Since then, the stalls had been empty. Elijah had spoken more to the wind than to people. He didn't expect to find a new Cypress. That wasn't the point. But something in this broken horse didn't deserve to be laughed at. Dawn came sharp, with a dry wind and the sound of distant hawks. Elijah was up before the sun, carrying oats in an old tin bucket to the stall. The horse looked up slowly, but didn't flinch. I'm calling you Dusty, Elijah said. Since that's what you were when I found you, Dusty made no protest. He sniffed the oats, then took a slow bite. Over the next few days, Elijah kept space between them. He didn't ride. Didn't force. He cleaned the stall, left fresh hay, and let Dusty observe him, and slowly the horse began to lift his head more often. His limp lessened. When Elijah approached with a brush, Dusty didn't move away, just watched, eyes tracking every stroke. Elijah spoke quietly, more to fill the quiet than anything else. He talked about rusted tools, bad coffee, feed prices, and one evening his son, Luke, he said, brushing Dusty's mane. Liked horses better than folks. Took off after a fight. Never heard from him again. Dusty flicked an ear. Sometimes I came to auctions thinking I might see him. With a horse he saved, but it's always ghosts. The dry grass shifted in the wind. Elijah paused, hand resting gently on Dusty's shoulder. You're the first I brought back since. That night, for the first time in years, he left the stall door slightly open. Just enough for sound to pass between walls. 1 week passed. Dusty's limp faded with rest and grain. His ribs began to vanish beneath a growing coat. Muscle returned where hollows had been. Elijah didn't push. He let the horse remember how to just be. Elijah waited, watched for signs, never rushed. Eventually he led Dusty into the round pen. No saddle, no bridle, just a rope halter and quiet patience. Dusty circled warily, ears twitching, body tight but not defiant. Elijah moved with worn grace, guiding with presence, never pressure. Then Dusty turned in, lowered his head. Elijah gave a small nod. That's it. That's the beginning. Behind them, the sun dipped behind the barn, stretching their shadows long across the dirt. A still moment, but in Elijah's chest, something shifted. Hope, and like horses, hope doesn't charge in, it waits, tests the ground. At the fence line, Elijah stood with arms crossed, watching Dusty move under the pale morning sun. The limp had faded to a soft hitch. His coat, once dull, now shimmered with sweat and strength. He still startled at noise, paused at shifting light, but he moved to Elijah's voice like a soldier returning to familiar orders. Trust was forming, fragile, like an old rope. It would need weight to prove it could hold. Sessions grew longer. Elijah never hurried him. He had no time for frustration. He let Dusty lead the pace, rewarded each small courage, a few unsummoned steps. Stillness during grooming, the quiet acceptance of a saddle blanket across tired shoulders. By week 2, he introduced the saddle. Dusty stiffened, but didn't spook. Elijah whispered steady words, tightened the cinch slowly, gave him time to feel, to know he wouldn't be punished. When the bit finally touched his mouth, Dusty balked, just a little. Not fear, just uncertainty. Later that day, Elijah climbed into the saddle for the first time. His joints protested, back tense under the shift of balance. Dusty stood rigid, muscles taut. Elijah exhaled slow, letting old pain drain from his frame. Dusty stayed still, ears flicking back like a question. We're all right, Elijah said softly. Just you and me. They moved one circle, slow, just a walk. Elijah steered with gentle pressure, not reins. Dusty hesitated, but followed. Every step a quiet negotiation between old wounds and new mercy. When the ride ended, Elijah slid down carefully, rubbed Dusty's face. The gelding leaned into the touch, just slightly. That evening, under a sky stained red and purple, Elijah sat on the porch with his coffee. Life had found rhythm again mornings. In the saddle, afternoons repairing fence lines, evenings with Dusty nearby. Silence still lingered, but it no longer felt hollow. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel. Elijah looked up. A truck he didn't know eased into the drive, new, polished, too clean for this place. He stood slowly, setting the cup aside. His heart thudded, unsure why. A man stepped out, early 40s, tall, dressed in dark denim and a crisp shirt. Hair trimmed, face thinner, but the eyes. Elijah froze. Luke, his son, he stopped a few paces in. Hey, Dad. 12 years. 12 years of silence. No birthdays, no holidays. Not even a note. Elijah's mouth opened then closed. Luke shifted, unsure. Heard from someone in town you'd been to the auction, he said. Said you left with a half-dead horse and looked 10 years older. Elijah studied him. Didn't think you'd ever come back. Didn't think I would either. They stood like that, distance full of ghosts. Finally, Elijah gestured toward the porch. You hungry? Luke nodded. Always. Inside, over reheated stew and hard bread, words came slow. Luke talked about where he'd been ranches out west, good and bad, colts broken, barns repaired, years spent in trucks and dust. He didn't apologize, not outright, but his voice carried something close and asked without expectation. Elijah listened, nodding here and there. When Luke spoke of Cyprus, the horse he'd loved as a boy, Elijah looked down. He died the year after you left, he said quietly. Wandered off into the north pasture one night, never came back? I figured, Luke murmured. He always had one foot in the wild. After dinner, Elijah led Luke out to the stable. Dusty stood quiet in his stall, ears flicking toward them. He looked worse when I got him, Elijah said. Didn't have much left but air and something like hope. Luke stepped closer, eyeing the horse with the gaze of someone who knew. The shape of pain. He's got more fight than I thought, Luke said, watching Dusty from the stall door. That limp won't hold him back forever. His eyes are still sharp. I wasn't looking for another, Elijah replied quietly. Didn't think I could care again. Luke didn't respond right away. He extended a hand, letting Dusty sniff it before trailing his fingers down the gelding's neck. He cared anyway. For the next week, they slipped into a rhythm. Luke stayed in the old guest room, patched a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, cleared out the tool shed. They spoke of the past just enough to acknowledge it, like pressing a faded bruise to see if it still ached. Together they worked Dusty. One morning Luke asked if he could ride. Elijah only nodded. Dusty accepted the new rider with a bit of edge, a flick of challenge in his step, but also grace. He wasn't following commands, he was making a choice. Choosing trust. While tightening a girth strap, Luke glanced over. What are you going to do with him? Elijah shrugged. Keep him. Ride him, let him be what he wants to be. You could show him. County fair's coming up, he turned heads. I'm not much for crowds, Elijah said, and Luke let it drop. But that evening, Elijah found an envelope on the porch bench. Inside, a flyer, Spring County Horse Show. 3 weeks away, scrawled on the back in Luke's handwriting. I'll ride him if you let me. Or stand beside you if you change your mind? Elijah stared at the flyer for a long while. It didn't scare him. It ached. A wanting he hadn't dared to feel in years. That night he lay in bed listening to the rustle of hay, the distant groan of the windmill. He remembered Luke walking away, boots stirring dust as he disappeared down the road. And then he pictured him coming back. Not as a boy, but as a man. Changed, still his son. The next morning, Elijah found Luke in the pasture, tossing hay into the trough. If you think he's ready, Elijah said, we'll go. Luke turned, squinting into the sun. He's ready. They both looked toward the stable, where Dusty stood framed in the open doorway, wind teasing his mane. His body no longer trembled. His eyes were clear. They had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare, to prove that healing isn't a single act, it's a daily decision. And that choice had already begun. The fairgrounds buzzed with life, laughter, hooves striking packed earth, the distant hum of fiddles and loudspeakers. Elijah stood at the arena rail, calloused hands gripping the top slat. He tried to appear calm, but his eyes betrayed him. They tracked Dusty like a prayer cast into wind. The horse gleamed in the morning light, bronze coat rippling over hard-earned muscle. The limp was almost gone, just a whisper now. He held his head high no longer. Broken, no longer afraid, Luke wore a plain blue shirt, faded jeans, and an easy confidence Elijah hadn't seen in over a decade. He spoke gently to Dusty, adjusted the reins with steady fingers. They moved together, rider and horsebound, not just by training, but by shared recovery. Forgiveness unspoken, but felt the show wasn't flashy. Locals came for tradition. Pride, a ribbon maybe. But for Elijah, the arena was sacred ground. A place where pain was acknowledged and grace was offered. Dusty's event was a trail course, simple but telling. Gates to open, poles to navigate, a narrow wooden bridge to cross. It wasn't about speed. It was about trust, calm, precision. Luke guided him to the start. The judge gave a nod. Elijah held his breath. The first gate came easy. Dusty halted, waited for cue, then stepped sideways with surprising delicacy. Luke moved slower, as if his mind were full. Dusty turned his head at the sound of footsteps, ears flicking forward, then relaxed again. Luke reached up to stroke his neck, then set the feed bucket down and began brushing in long, even strokes, not rushing. Not needing to. Elijah took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving them. He saw it now, the ease in Luke's posture, the unspoken trust in the way Dusty leaned into the curry comb. It wasn't about training anymore, it was companionship. A quiet agreement. You show up, and so will I. Later that afternoon, clouds gathered over the ridge, heavy with the promise of summer rain. Elijah called out from the porch, "Storm will be on us by evening." Luke, tightening Dusty's blanket, just nodded. "He'll be fine. He's got a stall. Doesn't have to prove anything out there." Luke looked back over his shoulder. "Neither do I." Elijah smiled faintly. That was new, the knowing, the calm assurance in Luke's voice. Not defiant, not defensive. Just steady. That night, the rain came in soft, steady sheets. Elijah stood at the barn's open doors, watching the downpour bead and roll from the roof. Inside, Dusty munched hay without a care in the world. Luke sat on a hay bale nearby, elbows on his knees, content just to be there. "I used to wonder," Elijah said finally, voice low. "If I'd done it different, said more, held on tighter, maybe you wouldn't have left." Luke didn't look up. "I had to go. Not because of you, because of me." "I know," Elijah said. "And he did?" Finally, thunder rolled gently across the hills. Dusty shifted his weight, unbothered. Luke reached out and rested a hand on the gelding's shoulder. "He brought us back together." "No," Elijah said again. "We chose to come back." Another silence passed. Warm this time, grateful. Outside, the rain kept falling soft, steady, cleansing. Tomorrow would be muddy. Fences would need checking. Tools would need oiling. Life would carry on, but tonight father and son sat in a barn beside a once-forgotten horse, and the past, though still there, no longer ruled the present. In its place stood something quieter, stronger. Belonging. He knew he could always come home. Back on the ranch, the days fell into their quiet rhythm again. Elijah fixed fence lines, tended the garden, and drank his coffee on the porch with an empty chair beside him. It wasn't loneliness he felt. It was space that had once been hollow and aching, now filled with memory, with hope, with the sound of hooves that would return. Each evening he left the barn light on, not out of habit, but as a signal. A soft, glowing promise that the door was still open, the stall still ready. In Montana, the drive pressed on. Long days, hard saddles, early dawns. But Dusty took to the work like he'd been made for it. Sure-footed through narrow passes, patient with greenhorns, swift over flatland. The cowboys started calling him Ghost, on account of how quiet he moved and how his rider rarely spoke. But when Luke did speak, it was with calm certainty earned not from perfection, but from perseverance. One night, as they camped near the canyon rim, Luke scribbled in his journal beneath the stars. "He taught me not just how to ride again, but how to stay." He closed the book and leaned back, eyes tracing constellations he hadn't noticed in years. Behind him, Dusty exhaled and shifted, his body warm against the cold air. Luke let his hand fall, resting lightly on the horse's withers. "I'm not lost anymore," he whispered. And somewhere miles away, a porch light flickered softly in the night. A ranch lay quiet under the moon, but not empty. Not anymore. Because some homes aren't made of wood or wire, they're made of second chances and the will to return.